In the autumn of 1834, when England's aristocracy balanced its grandeur upon the fragile edge of reputation, Aylesford Hall stood as a monument to order, refinement, and the unspoken power of noble blood. Its marble columns, its mirrored corridors, its whispering servants, all served the man at its helm. The Duke of Aylesford, Edmund Hawthorne, a figure praised for his unyielding discipline and feared for the same. At 26, he bore the composure of a man twice his age, sculpted by duty and expectation into a model of impeccable restraint. Those who dined at his table spoke admiringly of his precision, yet privately they uttered that he was more statue than man, carved from rules rather than warmth. Henrietta Clark, newly arrived as a companion to the Dowager Countess, had not expected her path to cross so directly with the Duke's. At 23, she possessed a quiet self-possession and the kind of intelligence that revealed itself not in boastfulness but in attentive observation. Her upbringing had been modest, yet she carried herself with a dignity that made strangers assume her birth was finer than it was. She had never imagined she would step foot in a ducal household, let alone become entangled in its delicate web of expectations. She meant only to serve with humility, learn what she could, and remain invisible where necessity demanded. On the morning of the grand dinner meant to honor a delegation from London, Henrietta descended to the bustling kitchen only to discover disarray. The French chef had collapsed from exhaustion after days of preparation. The sous chef, overwhelmed, had begged for any assistance. Henrietta, moved by instinct rather than permission, offered to prepare one dish, a simple stew reminiscent of her childhood. She knew it lacked the sophistication of French sauces and continental garnish, but the kitchen had been desperate. She worked with steady hands, hoping earnest effort might compensate for her lack of training. When she placed the finished pot upon the counter, she whispered a quiet prayer that it would simply go unnoticed. When the hour arrived, the dining hall glittered under the light of hundreds of candles. The air waited with expectation. The Duke presided at the head of the table with an expression carved in stone, greeting dignitaries with polite coolness. Henrietta stood discreetly behind a screen, unable to resist observing the scene. She watched footmen glide between guests with silver trays, each dish a testament to the estate's reputation, until her own creation was placed before the guests. The moment the spoon touched the first noble's mouth, she sensed a shift. A faint tightening around the woman's lips, a glance exchanged, an almost imperceptible stiffening of posture. Whispered criticism began in the language of raised brows and pointed silence. Then someone spoke outright, a gentleman with a reputation for cruelty, commenting that the dish tasted frightfully rustic, as though a peasant's pot had intruded upon the table of civilization. Laughter followed, quick, sharp cutting. The Duke's jaw tightened. Henrietta saw it, though no one else noticed. He set down his utensil with a soft clink that sliced through the murmurs. The room fell still as he rose. His eyes searched for the culprit, and though she remained half-hidden, he found her. His voice, calm yet edged with steel, carried effortlessly. "Miss Clark," he said, "approach." Heat rushed to her cheeks as she stepped forward, hands clasped to steady their trembling. She opened her mouth to explain, to offer apology, but the Duke lifted a hand. "This household," he said, "is known for its precision, its refinement, its commitment to excellence. Tonight, that reputation has been compromised. You have shown neither judgment nor understanding of what is required of you. You," he paused, and the silence became a living thing, "are not Duchess material. Get your clothes and leave." The word struck with the force of a blow. Conversations halted completely. Someone gasped. Henrietta felt her lungs tighten as she curtsied with shaking steadiness, then turned away from the table, her humiliation dragging behind her like a torn train. She walked the length of the corridor to her chamber as though wading through cold water. Each familiar portrait on the walls seemed to watch her in silent pity. The lamps cast soft golden pools, but the light brought no comfort. She closed the door behind her and pressed her back to it, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. The insult echoed mercilessly. "Not Duchess material. as if she had ever presumed to be. With deliberate calm, she gathered her few belongings: a worn copy of Milton, a shawl her mother had embroidered, the modest gown she had folded with care when she first arrived. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, though her vision blurred. She told herself she would not cry. Not here, not within these walls that had judged her wanting. A knock sounded, sudden and unbidden. She stiffened, clutching her trunk. The door creaked open before she could respond. The Duke stood there. No entourage, no polished composure. Just a man whose certainty had faltered. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. His eyes took in the packed trunk, the folded shawl, her resolute expression. Something unguarded flickered across his features. "Miss Clark," he said quietly, He stopped, as though the words resisted leaving him. She straightened, spine rigid. "Your Grace, if you have come to repeat your dismissal, you may save the effort. I am prepared to leave immediately." Her poised defiance seemed to unsettle him more than her tears would have. His gaze dropped briefly, then returned to meet hers with an intensity that made the room feel suddenly smaller. "That is not why I am here," he murmured. The corridor behind him stretched into silence. The candles hissed softly. Henrietta felt the fragile boundary between anger and something more tremulous vibrating in the stillness. The Duke stepped one pace closer, not enough to presume, but enough to suggest the possibility of something neither of them yet dared name. "Allow me," he said, "to speak before you go." He exhaled softly. The Duke remained in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he had earned the right to cross it. Henrietta stood motionless beside her trunk, the ruined dignity of the evening still clinging to her like damp air. The silence stretched, so taut it seemed it might snap, yet neither seemed capable of yielding first. His eyes, once so unyielding in the dining hall, now held something far less certain, something that unsettled her more deeply than his anger had. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, a measured tone that strained against its own restraint. "I spoke in haste," he said. "A man may command an estate, but even he may falter when confronted by imperfection." He paused, as though regretting even that word. "I allowed the moment to rule me." Henrietta met his gaze without flinching. "Your Grace, the matter is concluded. I will not ask you to reconsider a decision so publicly made." Her calmness shook him more than protest would have. With a small, almost imperceptible gesture, he stepped inside the room, letting the door fall gently shut behind him. The soft click echoed like a confession. She felt the air shift, charged with something unspoken. "Miss Clark," he said, "you misunderstand. My words were not only unkind, they were unjust. I judged you before I understood anything of your intention." His gaze flicked briefly to the worn shawl folded atop her trunk. "You did what you believed necessary. I should have thanked you, not embarrassed you." She lifted her chin. "The harm is done. Whatever your intention now, the household witnessed everything. Your guests, too. I cannot remain in a place where I have been made a spectacle." His expression tightened with regret. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, as though searching for the first time in his life for words he did not possess. His hands, normally so composed, curled slightly at his sides. "Henrietta," he said softly, dropping the formal address without realizing it. "I did not come to justify myself. I came because—" She did not allow him to finish. "Please, Your Grace," she whispered, "do not offer me pity. It is the one thing I cannot accept." He stepped closer, propelled by instinct rather than reason, until only a breath of distance remained. She felt the warmth of him, the faint scent of sandalwood and ink. He hesitated, his voice nearly a whisper. "It is not pity." Those three words caused her breath to catch. She looked up at him, truly looked, and saw not the Duke of Aylesford, but a man struggling against a lifetime of rigid composure. Their eyes locked, and the fragile boundary that had held them apart began to dissolve. Before she could speak, he reached out, slowly, as though terrified she might retreat, and brushed his fingertips against the trunk's handle. "You should not leave like this," he said, not believing that I meant every cruel syllable. "You did mean them, she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts. You meant them because I embarrassed you. Because I was a reminder of everything the aristocracy finds lacking. His gaze sharpened, wounded by the truth in her words. If I am to be judged, he murmured, let it be for the wrongs I have done, not the feelings I have attempted, unsuccessfully, to bury. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the small room, the dim lamplight, and the restless rise and fall of two unsettled chests. Henrietta felt the boundaries of propriety fray with every breath. She told herself she should step back, demand distance, restore the order shattered by his intrusion. But her body did not move. The Duke reached out, then stopped halfway, hovering near her cheek without touching. The restraint in that gesture trembled like a held note, reverent and uncertain. She felt the warmth of his hand even without contact, and the awareness of him. This man who had cut her so deeply only hours before drew something raw and aching to the surface. Forgive me, he whispered, if I overstep. The apology was barely voiced before he closed the small remaining distance. His lips brushed hers not with the certainty of a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, but with the hesitancy of one who feared the consequence of hope. The kiss was fleeting, trembling, a fragile question rather than a claim. Henrietta inhaled sharply, startled by the gentleness, by the unmistakable sincerity that radiated through the moment. She did not return the kiss, not fully, but neither did she resist. Her hands remained at her sides, fingers clenched around the fabric of her skirt. When he pulled back slightly, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, an emotion he seemed almost ashamed to show. This, he said, voice strained, was not meant to be inflicted upon you tonight. But I could not let you walk away believing yourself unworthy. She swallowed hard, her thoughts a storm of conflict. Your Grace, you cannot speak to me this way. You cannot treat me with disdain in the hall and tenderness in the dark. His jaw tightened. You are right, but I am not a man immune to regret. Regret, she said quietly, is not enough to erase humiliation. He closed his eyes briefly, the truth cutting. When he opened them again, they held a promise he did not yet have the courage to voice. If you leave, he said, I fear I will never forgive myself. And if you stay, I vow. She stopped him with a soft shake of her head. Do not vow anything tonight. Words spoken in the shadow of guilt sound far sweeter than they proved to be. Her refusal struck him like a physical force. Yet something softened within him too, a recognition, perhaps, that she would not be manipulated by remorse or affection. He stepped back, the distance both painful and necessary. I will not detain you, he said. But know this, the fault tonight was mine alone. And should you go, I will follow the consequence of that failing for longer than you know. She did not trust her voice, so she gave a single, trembling nod. He bowed, not stiffly, but with genuine respect, then turned toward the door. His hand lingered on the latch, as though reluctant to sever the fragile thread between them. When the door finally closed behind him, Henrietta pressed a hand to her lips, still warm from the kiss she had not expected and did not understand. She sank onto the edge of her trunk, heart pounding, breath uneven, and stared at the quiet room that had witnessed her dismissal and her undoing. Outside, footsteps whispered away down the corridor, each one carrying a new uncertainty. And though she had no intention of staying, she found herself wondering, for the first time, whether leaving would truly set her free or bind her to him more tightly than she dared admit. The next morning arrived veiled in a damp, colorless mist, as though the world itself attempted to soften the severity of the night before. Henrietta left Aylesford Hall before the household stirred, her trunk secured upon a hired cart, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders. She did not glance back at the towering estate, though every instinct urged her to steal one final look. The memory of the Duke's kiss clung to her with an intimacy she resented, a confusing blend of tenderness and sorrow that made each step away feel heavier than the last. She reminded herself that distance would restore clarity, that dignity required departure, yet the ache under her ribs suggested the matter was not so easily settled. The village lay several miles from the estate, nestled among rolling meadows and hedgerows dripping with morning dew. Modest cottages lined the narrow lane, their chimneys releasing thin plumes of smoke. Her mother's home appeared unchanged, weathered brick, ivy curling around the doorway, a small garden where herbs still struggled to grow despite the cooling season. When Henrietta stepped inside, her mother gasped at the sight of her pale face and tear-chapped lips, embracing her without question. Henrietta allowed herself a moment of refuge, but she could not yet bring herself to recount the humiliation. She merely said she had returned sooner than expected. For the next 2 days, she attempted to lose herself in ordinary tasks, mending old linens, sweeping the floor, helping prepare simple meals. Each action brought its own familiar comfort, yet none succeeded in quieting her thoughts. The Duke's face intruded on every moment. The way his composure had cracked, the tremor in his voice, the restrained desperation in the kiss he should never have offered. She told herself it was merely guilt, nothing more. Men of his rank were not permitted genuine attachment to women beneath them. What occurred was a mistake, and mistakes dissolve with time. Yet when she closed her eyes at night, she felt again the weight of his regret, heavy enough to trouble even her dreams. On the third morning, the tranquility shattered. Henrietta was gathering water from the well when she heard the rhythmic approach of hooves along the lane. She turned, expecting a local farmer, only to see a rider whose bearing was unmistakably noble. The Duke of Aylesford slowed his horse as he neared her, rain-speckled cloak clinging to his broad shoulders, dark hair dampened by the lingering mist. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. No servant accompanied him, no herald announced him, no barrier of rank protected him from impropriety. He had come alone. "Miss Clark," he said, dismounting with more haste than grace. His boots splashed against the wet earth as he approached, his expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I apologize for startling you." She steadied her breath. "Your Grace, you should not be here. Your presence will cause talk." "There is already talk," he replied quietly. "Let the truth accompany it." Her pulse throbbed in her throat. "You must return at once. If anyone sees you—" "They have seen me," he said, gesturing faintly toward the village. "I passed several cottages. I imagine half the parish knows by now." Henrietta swallowed hard. "Then you have only worsened matters." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but I would not allow you to leave believing I felt nothing for what transpired. I have not known rest since you walked away from my hall. Every room feels empty. Every hour mocks me with the memory of what I said and what I failed to say." His honesty struck her with unexpected force. She had anticipated defensiveness, perhaps even another apology elevated by pride. She had not expected confession. She lowered her gaze. Words spoken in regret are difficult to trust. He stepped closer, though not so near as he had in her chamber. The restraint in his posture revealed the depth of his struggle. "Then trust action. I have written here not to soothe my conscience, but because your absence revealed what your presence had concealed. You have become essential to me, Henrietta, in ways I had not the wisdom to understand." Her breath faltered. "Your Grace, we are from different worlds. Whatever you felt in that moment was impulse, not affection." "If impulse alone guided me," he said, "I would not be standing in the mud outside your mother's home. I would not have abandoned my duties, and I would not have risked every rumor that now follows me." His voice softened. "I came because losing you feels like a punishment I cannot endure." She closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the sincerity threaded through his words. When she opened them again, she saw something she had never expected in a duke's expression, something tender, unguarded, profoundly vulnerable. "Walk with me," he murmured. "Only a short distance. No promises, no demands. I ask only for your time." Against her better judgment, she nodded. They walked along the damp path that bordered the orchard. Fallen apples lay scattered among the grass, their sweet scent rising in the cool air. The Duke slowed his steps to match hers, his hands clasped behind him as though grounding himself with physical discipline. For a long while they said nothing. The quiet was not oppressive. It was contemplative, the kind of silence that allows truths to gather before being spoken. At last he said, "I have brought something for you." From within his coat, he withdrew a small volume. Its cover a deep green leather, embossed with elegant gold lettering. She recognized it immediately. A French cookery book revered among culinary circles. She accepted it hesitantly. "Why this?" "Because you deserve refinement without ridicule," he said. "Not to please me, nor to appease my guests, but because your talent deserves the chance to flourish. You acted from courage, not ignorance. I misjudged you, and I wish to make amends." She traced the gilded spine with trembling fingers. The gesture was far more intimate than any jewel could have been. "This is an extravagant apology." "It is not an apology," he said softly. "It is acknowledgement." Before she could respond, the distant sound of approaching footsteps echoed. A villager passed by, eyes widening at the sight of them. The Duke did not withdraw, though he stiffened slightly, acknowledging the weight of the moment. Henrietta understood instantly what this meant. Their conversation, private, tender, precariously balanced, would soon travel through the village, then outward to neighboring estates. Her heart raced with both fear and a strange, bright thread of hope she dared not fully examine. The Duke held her gaze. "Whatever comes of this," he said, "I will not allow your name to suffer for my mistakes." She clutched the book to her chest, sensing that the fragile path they now walked could change both their lives. The villager hurried on, and the air between them shifted again, heavy with unspoken possibility. Rumors swept through Aylesford and its surrounding estates with the swift, eager hunger of crows descending upon grain. By the time the Duke returned to his hall, weary from his journey and weighted by new resolve, whispers had already taken form. The Duke had ridden alone to a village cottage. He had sought a woman's company. He had risked propriety for reasons that no one could quite name, but everyone preferred to embellish. Servants exchanged knowing glances, footmen stiffened when he passed, and several neighboring families sent polite but pointed inquiries regarding the truth of his visit. He ignored all of them. Instead, he summoned his steward and dictated a formal announcement with the calmness of a man who had finally chosen his path. The message would spread quickly, for such letters always did. The Duke of Aylesford intended to marry Miss Henrietta Clark, formerly employed as companion to the Dowager Countess. When the steward hesitated, the Duke looked up, expression firm but not harsh. "Send it," he said. "Let no one claim ignorance as an excuse for cruelty." Word reached Henrietta 2 days later, arriving in the form of an envelope bearing the seal of Aylesford. She held it with both hands, scarcely daring to breathe. Her mother watched from across the table, brows knit in concern. When Henrietta finally broke the seal, she found not elaborate declarations but a simple, steady line written in the Duke's own hand, affirming his intentions with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. The letter was accompanied by a second, addressed to her mother, asking formally for her blessing. Henrietta felt the ground shift beneath her as she read, her heart suspended between joy and disbelief. Her mother, though startled, saw the truth in her daughter's eyes. "My dear," she whispered, placing a hand over Henrietta's trembling fingers, "if this is the road you choose, I will not stand in your way. But think carefully. His world is not gentle to those who enter without lineage." Henrietta nodded, aware of the sharp claws of society's judgment. Yet she also remembered the Duke's earnest words in the orchard, the sincerity that had softened his usually forbidding voice. She remembered, too, the book he had given her, resting now upon her bedside table like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. That evening, she penned her reply. Though her hand shook, her heart did not falter. The wedding took place in a modest chapel rather than the grand cathedral the Duke's advisors recommended. He refused the extravagance, insisting the ceremony reflect sincerity, not spectacle. A limited gathering attended. A few sympathetic relatives, the Dowager Countess, and several villagers who had known Henrietta all her life. The service was simple, yet the moment he took her hand carried a gravity that neither candles nor choirs could have amplified. When he spoke his vows, his voice was steady, but emotion threaded through each word like soft gold. Henrietta felt the magnitude of the promise deepen with every syllable. Afterward, the carriage ride to Aylesford Hall was quiet, comfortable in a way she had not expected. The Duke watched her with gentle attentiveness, as though memorizing the curve of her smile, the cadence of her breath. She realized then that his restraint was not a barrier, but a discipline shaped by loneliness, now slowly unraveling. When they arrived at the estate, the doors opened to a transformed household. Staff bowed with a mixture of awe and curiosity, and Henrietta sensed the weight of her new role settle across her shoulders. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Life as Duchess demanded more of her than she had anticipated. Every visit, every letter, every invitation carried layers of expectation. Yet she faced each challenge with quiet determination. The French chef the Duke hired treated her with a professional rigor that bordered on severity, but she learned quickly, absorbing every detail with diligence. Her dishes began as modest successes and grew gradually into refined creations, infused with her own instinctive warmth. The kitchen, once a site of humiliation, became a sanctuary where she discovered both skill and confidence. The Duke observed her progress with a quiet pride he rarely voiced aloud. In the evenings, they often met in the library, where she would recount her day's lessons while he listened with growing admiration. Their early awkwardness gradually softened into companionship, and from companionship grew a tender intimacy neither had dared hope for. His once impassive demeanor warmed in her presence, while she found herself trusting his steadiness with increasing ease. A year passed before the moment of true testing arrived. The Duke proposed hosting another dinner, this time for the same dignitaries whose scorn had sparked the chain of events that altered both their lives. Henrietta felt the old wound stir, but she met the challenge with unshaken resolve. She prepared the menu herself, working late into the night under the soft glow of the kitchen lamps. Each dish bore the mark of her growth: balanced flavors, refined presentation, and subtle nuances that reflected both her training and her innate sensibility. When the guests arrived, they carried expressions poised for judgment. Henrietta greeted them with calm grace, neither deferential nor boastful. She moved between the tables with the poise of someone who had learned dignity not from birthright, but through fire. The dishes were served one by one, and silence fell. Not the uneasy silence of disapproval, but the contemplative quiet of those forced to reassess their assumptions. Several guests murmured compliments. Others nodded with reluctant respect. After the final course, the hall buzzed with softened chatter. The Duke approached Henrietta near the window, where moonlight spilled over her shoulders. He looked at her with an expression filled not with pride alone, but with something far deeper. "Henrietta," he said softly, "you were always Duchess material. It was I who lacked the wisdom to see it." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the tenderness woven into his admission. She reached for his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his palm envelop hers. "We have both changed," she replied. "Perhaps that is what makes this life ours." He smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that illuminated the room more than any candle. They stood together, gazing out over the moonlit gardens, where autumn roses glowed like embers scattered across the dark. And though the world beyond still whispered, the voices no longer mattered. The story of the Duke and the woman he once dismissed had become a testament not to scandal, but to transformation, proof that love, when courageously chosen, can rebuild everything it once threatened to destroy.